welcome to the Growth Mindset Podcast. Today we're diving into happiness, enjoyment of life, and examining our amazing ability to completely mess up our own happiness and disappoint ourselves. We are all human after all. This episode is not here to make you feel bad, but instead to make you feel empowered and aware of how we get in our own way. Life is to be enjoyed, yet we often have lots of ideas of things that would make us enjoy life even more than we already enjoy it. That's very natural. We are designed to spot opportunities, but the issues arise when we fall in love with the ideas and dreams in our head, when we get ahead of ourselves and we think about things that are never actually going to happen in our life. Ultimately, so much of our happiness is completely within our control, yet many people live a life of disappointing themselves, wanting things that don't make sense for their situation, and are just causing themselves pointless frustrations. So this will be a short, sharp episode on how to stop disappointing yourself and live with more harmony. So number one is thinking of your past self versus your present self. Now, the writer who no longer writes anymore is not a writer. The artist who no longer paints is not an artist. The vegan that occasionally eats animal products is no longer a vegan. And we just have many identities from our past selves that we cling on to, at least in our minds. And it's weird because if you think about the day we graduate from university, we stop calling ourselves a student. We move on straight away. But so many other things we cling to, and they have nothing to do with our present day existence. Just because we have potential skills and even enjoy the practice of an activity, if we do not practice that activity, we are no longer a practitioner. If you haven't run in many months, you are no longer a runner. So every day that you wake up and you don't run, it's disappointing because you have the identity of being a runner, but every day you're also a failure. So if you let go of your identity, that it's no longer serving you and instead only causing you harm, then you can live a life with less disappointment. And of course, if you want to be a runner, then start running again. So, lesson one, kill ideas of your old self that are no longer true and live in reality. And if you don't like reality, then change it. There's a really cool study from psychologist Mr. Hirschfield who showed people aged photos of themselves, and the result was that they then made smarter financial decisions. Why did they do this? Well, they were finally able to see the future ahead of them as real. And the same thing works backwards. Past you isn't you, so you have to stop living that story. It's sad when you see people get stuck in an identity. The 50-year-old who still goes clubbing and taking drugs, who hasn't let go of their old self. Ultimately, time flows like a river, and as you go down it, you have to reinvent yourself and embrace each phase of life. Arnold Schwarzenegger was great at this. He was one of the world's most successful bodybuilders. But he didn't spend the rest of his life just talking about his bodybuilding prime. He went on to become one of the world's most successful actors, even though the first movie producers that he went to laughed at his auditions. Later, after he'd had a long acting career, he didn't carry on just taking the odd high-paying movie. He moved on to a new version of himself and he became a statesman as the governor of California. The lesson is that you have to accept that the old you is dead, and if it isn't dead, you have to proactively kill it. Once you've done that, you can audit your current identity and choose who you want to be. And then lastly, probably the hardest part is then being that person you want to be today. And on that, we're going to move on to the next point about bringing future ideas of ourselves into reality. Number two, our future self versus the present. The entrepreneur that doesn't actually make any money isn't entrepreneurial. The influencer with no followers has no influence. And simply put, you do not become a black belt in karate by declaring it so. It must be earned through hard work and not through big words. It is not enough to want something. You must be willing to do what is required to get it. And to quote James Clear, if you don't want to live the lifestyle, then release yourself from the desire. To crave the result but not the process is to guarantee disappointment, which is exactly what we're talking about here. It's so enticing to get ahead of ourselves and live in the future. We see all these things on social media, YouTube, podcasts. We see people's success and these lives that we want for ourselves. And we're like, yeah, these are changes that I want to have. But we brush past all the problems and difficult crap that are part of the process to get to that eventual goal. And we fail to accept that actually we don't enjoy that process. To become a master of something, you have to become comfortable as an embarrassing amateur. Having a goal is great, but you have to want to walk the entire path to get there. Desiring something that isn't going to happen is just another source of frustration and disappointment, because every day that you aren't making progress towards your goal is another day that you're a failure, which again makes you feel like crap. Whenever you find yourself wanting something or talking about who you could be, step back and look at the actions that are required today that would help you get there. If those actions aren't something that you actually want to do, then you're not on the path to the goal and you're not going to get there. And that means you don't want that goal, which means you must accept that you don't want it and you can let it go from your identity. Then you can be at peace with who you are, and instead of being frustrated with who you are failing to become, you can just be happier. So lesson 2 is to forget any ideas of your future self that do not align with actions that you want to do in the present. Of course, identity and behavior change takes time. The 2 big lessons here are to start small and to build consistency. So if you want to be a writer and write your magnus opus in a book one day, you don't want to start out by trying to write 2,000 words a day of that giant book, especially when you haven't even worked out what the book is about. You should instead start by trying to write just 100 words a day, maybe for just a tweet or a blog that you can release consistently. The key is to keep things small, simple, and to try the Seinfeld method for consistency of never breaking your chain. Every day, he tried to write a joke and he'd put an X on his calendar if he wrote a single joke or more. Then, he'd simply try to not break his chain of X's. Now, for a big part of his writing career, he was writing for one of the biggest TV shows in the world, and that is a thought that is quite overwhelming. But thinking about the idea of just writing a single joke or more today to not break your chain of X's isn't so hard to deal with. Right, now, number 3. Speaking versus being heard. Being listened to is a fundamental human need, and being ignored is frustrating and disappointing. My past guest on the show, Lisa Forte, taught me that the secret of public speaking is having something to say. And if you look at the popular guests on podcasts or on YouTube, it's pretty obvious to see who people want to hear from. We listen to the adventurer that cycled across the world because they're more interesting than the person that read their book. We listen to Olympians more than we do the people that watch them on TV. We'll listen to a founder who's more interesting than the employee. And if you want to interest people, it starts with being interesting. Now, you don't necessarily have to do something really extreme and crazy, or a lot of those things are actually hugely stressful and might not be something you want to do, and those could be aspirations that aren't healthy. A whole separate topic is our hustle culture these days that makes us feel like we need to achieve as much as we humanly can, as quickly as possible, and it's actually not that healthy. But anyway, the lesson I'm trying to show you here is that if you want to give opinions, it helps to have authority. If you lecture me about starting a business and you've never run a business, I'm not going to value your opinions that strongly. If, however, you ask me useful questions that make me think about what I'm doing with my business, or maybe give me ways of reframing my opportunities, that could be a great conversation. So think about where you're coming from and don't claim any authority you don't have. Now, you can earn authority by, of course, doing an action such as starting a business, but there are other ways to be listened to just by providing useful input in a different way other than just giving opinions. Now, in the same way, I don't have any kids. If I tell a parent how to raise their children, that's a good way for me to lose friends. But if I talk about psychology and how we learn behaviors, and that actually humans are built to replicate and copy the behaviors of others around us, much more so than we are able to copy behaviors of just what we've been told, that could be a useful starter to a conversation on how to help your child use your phone less. Because if you're using your phone all the time, you're not going to get listened to when you talk to them about stopping to use their phone. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to solve all the problems, because they probably have friends that use their phones all the time. They look at influencers who use their phones all the time. So just because you stop using your phone, I'm not saying that's going to fix it. And I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I am saying that you're not going to get listened to in a conversation about phone use if you use your phone all the time. So the point I'm trying to make is that if you want to be listened to and respected, that starts by being respectable and practicing what you preach. If you want to talk about the importance of kindness, you must be a kind person. If you want to talk about the importance of caring for the environment, you must actually be making sacrifices yourself rather than just complaining about others ruining the world for you. Because that also removes your feeling of autonomy and control of the world around you, and that's going to be the point next. To round up this point, not being listened to is a very disappointing feeling, but it's something that is in our control and is a direct result of our actions. Listening to people is a sign of respect, but respect is earned and is up to us to earn it rather than demand it. What you want to have done and what you want to do can be very different things. When those two exist in harmony, your words and actions also align, which means that you're more likely to get listened to. If you put time into things you want to do instead of talking about things you want to have done, if your words are bigger than your actions, they mean nothing. After all, it's better to play a good game than it is to talk a good game. So, lesson 3, actions are louder than words. Always have actions bigger than your words. Number 4, taking ownership. The smoker who blames cigarette companies or their friends or stress is not going to quit smoking. The guy who blames his partner for his poor diet is never going to fix his diet. The runner who blames the weather for not running does not go running. It's easy to blame others for our problems in life. Now, this point doesn't sound like you're disappointing yourself directly because, you're blaming someone else for the disappointment. But the reality of the matter is that you are giving up your control, and that leads to your own disappointment. Only by taking ownership of a situation do you give yourself the power to change it. When you blame things around you, you lose control and you lose power. Without control or power in life, you become disappointed. And it's not just small things, but big things as well, like I was saying earlier. If you think about the environment and global warming, if you just blame oil companies and other people for the entire thing and yet make no sacrifices yourself, you're breaking rule number 3 because you have no authority to talk about something because you don't even do it yourself, and you're not taking any ownership. That's just a recipe for feeling like crap and annoyed and getting angry. If you practically take actions yourself and look at the ways that you can contribute towards making progress instead of just spreading hate and blame, then you can genuinely be useful and happier. One of our big issues these days is tribalism and blaming groups of people we don't even know for things we're not actually going to do anything about ourselves either. If instead we try to have intelligent conversation and progress, we can all learn to get more done. If we take more ownership and fix our own problems, instead of running around getting angry and blaming others for our crap, we would be a lot happier. I'm not saying that oil companies haven't caused lots of problems. They obviously have. I'm just saying you can do stuff yourself and feel better about the world. So stop blaming others for all your problems in life, because that's a recipe for getting stressed and angry and, of course, disappointed, as well as just being harmful to yourself. So lesson number 4, don't blame others for that which you can fix yourself. Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset shows that people who believe that they can change can actually do change, which is, mind-blowing. But meanwhile, the problem is for the people who say, it's not my fault. That crowd will stay stuck in their own problems. A nice example is Steve Jobs. He was kicked out of Apple, his own company. Now, he could have spent decades being really bitter just about that and resentful and blaming everything about the management team and hoping that people would just praise him for his brilliance. Instead, he goes and he builds new companies, he develops new skills, and he comes back eventually to transform Apple into $1 trillion company. And this reveals a hard truth about life. Life is unfair. People will maybe screw you over, many systems are broken, and precisely none of those details matter, because the only thing that you can control is your response to everything that happens in life. And so your choices are blame everybody else and stay stuck in these problems, or own your situation and do something about it. That's it. Those are your options. That's why I covered Stoicism a lot over January this year, because it relentlessly preaches about taking ownership and responsibility for your problems. Everything else that you might do is just creative ways of avoiding responsibility. The moment that you can stop blaming others is the moment that you get your own power back. As long as it stays someone else's fault, it's someone else's problem to fix, which means that you can't fix it. So the big lesson to repeat again is do not blame others for that which you can fix yourself. Okay, we have another big lesson coming up, followed by a giant meta overview roundup that will help bring all these things together after the break. And now we move on to the last and final lesson, lesson 5, about the gap between our expectations and reality. You probably know what I'm talking about. The space between who you think you should be and who you actually are. It's an emotional equivalent of ordering a Big Mac and then being served a sad lettuce sandwich. The thing here is, this gap isn't just making you miserable, it's also making you stupid. Because when you're constantly measuring yourself against some idealized version of yourself, you're basically playing a rigged game and you are both the rigger and the sucker. This gap between who you are and who you want to be, it's killing your happiness. For example, maybe you scroll through Instagram and there's someone crushing it at the gym. Someone else is building a 7-figure business and another friend has built their dream house or built an amazing extension on their dream house. Meanwhile, you're eating cereal for dinner again. And so the gap between who you are and who you want to be grows ever wider. As we've just spoken about in the last section, we can be victims of our situation and blame others, or we can build systems for victory. Take Michael Jordan. Yes, the Michael Jordan, the GOAT, the guy who was also cut from his high school basketball team. And he could have done what many people do. He could blame the coach. He could have quit basketball and spent the rest of his life telling stories about how he could have been something. Instead, he chose to be borderline psychotic about self-improvement. He got up every day at 6 a.m. to practice, every single day, and he didn't measure himself against some imaginary perfect version of himself. He measured himself against yesterday's Michael. And that's so powerful. Another great lesson about how to frame our perspectives comes from Thomas Edison. He failed thousands of times creating the light bulb, and instead of having an existential crisis about the gap between his expectations and reality, he had a different and more useful perspective. Each failure that he had wasn't really a failure in his mind and how he saw it. It was data. He said, I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work. And those failures all helped him get to where he wanted to be. And the point here is that success isn't about focusing on the gap between our expectations and reality, it's about the systems we use to close in on our expectations. And here's how you can build your own system. Firstly, set some realistic benchmarks. Instead of trying to get 6-pack abs in 30 days, try, I'll do 10 push-ups every morning, something you'll actually do and will actually improve your health. This might mean having goals that sound much less sexy in the short term, but actually end up with much bigger results. As long as you stay real with yourself, like really real. You have to set benchmarks that don't make you want to lie down and cry. Instead of, I'm going to write a bestseller this year, try, I'll write 500 words today. Then, part 2 of the system. Compare yourself to yesterday's you. Don't compare yourself to Instagram versions of people you don't know or just the best part of people's lives you do know, because it's only hurting yourself. We all know that it would be very stupid for me if every morning I woke up and compared myself to Brad Pitt and was like, my life is such a failure, I'm not nearly good looking enough and I haven't done many successful movies. Like, what would be the point of that? It would just make me miserable. Yet, basically, all humans, like 99% of us, we base our comparisons about how we're doing right now using the heuristic of looking at some people who are doing better than us. And so we then think, I'm not doing great. This person down the road has a better garden than me, whereas that person's got a swimming pool, whatever. And we don't realize that we're mixing and matching just the best bits of different people's lives and not even looking at their whole life. The only person you should compare yourself to is you, and that is you from yesterday. Right. Now, number 3, creating if-then plans. So if I'm too tired to go to the gym or it's closed, instead I'll do 10 minutes of a home workout. Or if I can't write 1,000 words, I'll still write 100. If I'm having breakfast, then I'll take my medicine. These are simple strategies that give us backup plans for when our plans go wrong, or chain things we need to do to things that we know we got, or chain things that we need to do to things we know we're going to do anyway. And the fancy pants terms here is implementation intention. And this term reminds us that intentions are useless without strategy. And finally, we have point 4 here, which is measure progress and not perfection. So track your wins, celebrate small victories, build momentum. And a good place here is to re-listen to the episode 1 week ago on creating slow and meaningful progress through dedication instead of jumping about and seeking quick wins and instant gratification. Right, wrapped up, remember, the gap between expectations and reality will never close completely. And that's okay. It's not about closing the gap. The gap itself isn't your enemy. It's actually your compass about what you should be doing. And the sooner that you can realize that, the sooner you can stop disappointing yourself and start actually getting somewhere. Ultimately, life is about building the bridge and making your goals and plans happen. Okay, so summary, and what have we learned here? Each of those points were very separate things, but they're all about not disappointing yourself, of course, which is the topic, and it also follows other themes. They're all about lying to yourself about what you expect from yourself. Now, even blaming others, that's when we expect that we would be the person that we dream of if it wasn't for the external thing. But the reality is that the first chance we get when this external thing comes along is that we delegate the requirements for us to do any work, and we fail to be the person that we expected ourselves to be. With all 4 of my points, there was always expectations on ourselves that weren't real and that we weren't going to do them. Now, as we know, expectations are the downfall of happiness and just the creators of disappointment. So the key to not disappointing yourself is found in actually seeing who you really are and accepting the reality of exactly this person that you are with love and kindness. And then, working from that foundation of respect, you can then work on doing what you can do to be your best self. Of course, there are now many more things in terms of how to create healthy habits and stick with them, how to manage your finances, how to do relationships, which are areas which you might be disappointing yourself in, but they all come down to the fundamental core of disappointing yourself with expectations of how you would show up and not doing them. So these 4 points are definitely worth journaling on to give yourself some more awareness, and maybe try talking about them with a friend or a therapist who can really help provide some support and give yourself a better sense of awareness that's really hard to achieve on your own, because these are some big topics to really get into your soul. So with that, thanks so much for listening to this show. If you enjoyed it, then it would be amazing if you shared it with a friend, as that's easily the best way for us to grow. And of course, a good rating would be a lovely way of making me feel special and loved. And remember, if you want to enjoy your life, that starts with enjoying today. So be kind to yourself, and whilst you're at it, be kind to someone else. Thank you so much for listening.
Go you!
Your consistency to reach the end of an episode is legendary.
My hero!
But when we learn things, it's important to reflect. So I politely invite you to take a pause, rifle through the biggest ideas you just heard. So here's your opportunity to hit pause and have a think. Okay, did you wrestle with some insights? Information doesn't stick when we race from one podcast to the next without using our brain to play with the knowledge. So here's another go at a pause. Alrighty, I'll let you off to continue with your life now. If you have any ideas or feedback for the show, I'm always interested to hear from you.
You're the best!
And other than that, please stay curious. Curious. Quote. Smiling for no reason.